You say you want to build wealth. You think about it. You plan for it. You even worry about it. But your behavior tells a different story, and that contradiction is not small. It's not occasional. It's not accidental. It's systematic. Most people believe their financial problem is external. Not enough income, bad economy, wrong opportunities. But that explanation feels true only because it's comfortable. Because the real explanation is harder to accept. You are not being blocked. You are interfering quietly, repeatedly, consistently. And the worst part is this: you don't experience it as sabotage, you experience it as normal. That's what makes it dangerous, because obvious mistakes are easy to fix. Hidden patterns are not. And what you call reasonable decisions today might be the exact mechanism that keeps your wealth from ever growing. This is not about one bad choice. It's about patterns that look harmless in isolation, but become destructive through repetition. And repetition is where wealth is actually decided, not in big moments, in small ones, repeated thousands of times. You don't lose your financial future in a single mistake. You lose it in decisions that feel too small to matter, spending a little more, waiting a little longer, avoiding a little discomfort, justifying a little inconsistency. Each one seems insignificant, but together they form a pattern, and that pattern compounds, not in your favor, against you, because compounding doesn't care about intention. It only follows behavior. You can want growth, you can plan growth, you can talk about growth, but if your behavior contradicts it, compounding follows your actions, not your intentions. And that is where most people lose control. Not because they lack discipline, but because they underestimate inconsistency. You don't need to make terrible financial decisions to stay stuck. You only need to make slightly misaligned ones, repeated consistently. That's enough. And this is where the illusion begins. You believe you are moving forward. Because nothing feels dramatically wrong. You're not going broke. You're not making catastrophic mistakes. You're just not progressing. And that state is extremely deceptive, because stagnation doesn't feel like failure. It feels like stability, it feels safe, it feels under control. But in financial reality, stagnation is not neutral, it's negative. Because time keeps moving, and time has a cost. Every year, you remain financially static. You are not maintaining your position. You are losing ground, silently. Because money that doesn't grow is money that is shrinking in real terms, and behavior that doesn't evolve locks you into that shrinking cycle. This is the part most people never fully process. Your financial life is not defined by what you do once. It's defined by what you tolerate repeatedly. And what you tolerate becomes your standard. And your standard becomes your pattern. And your pattern becomes your outcome. Not eventually, inevitably. You don't end up in a financial situation. You build it through repetition, through consistency, through alignment, or lack of it. And this is where the uncomfortable question appears. Not, do you want wealth? But, does your behavior agree with that? Because wanting something is easy, aligning your daily actions with it is not. And most people never close that gap. They operate with two parallel systems. One is aspirational, the other is behavioral. And they don't match. You say you want to invest, but you delay decisions. You say you want to save, but you justify small expenses. You say you want growth, but you avoid discomfort. Each contradiction seems minor, but the pattern is not, because inconsistency is not random. It follows predictable structures, psychological ones. And once those structures are in place, they operate automatically. You don't wake up thinking, today I will sabotage my financial future. You wake up and make decisions that feel reasonable, that feel justified, that feel aligned with your current emotional state. And that's the problem, because your emotional state is optimized for comfort, not for long-term growth. Your brain prefers relief over progress, certainty over opportunity, familiarity over expansion. And when those preferences guide your financial behavior, they create a pattern that feels safe but produces stagnation. This is not a lack of intelligence. This is not a lack of ambition. This is structural. Your behavior is not random. It is shaped by invisible rules, rules you didn't design but you follow automatically. And those rules determine how you interact with money, how you spend it, how you protect it, how you delay decisions, how you justify inconsistency. And over time, those rules become your financial identity. Not what you say about money, what you repeatedly do with it. That is your real identity. And identity is powerful. Because once a behavior becomes part of your identity, it no longer feels like a choice, it feels like who you are. I'm just careful with money. I don't like taking risks. I prefer to wait until I'm ready. I'll start investing later. Each statement sounds rational. Each one feels responsible. But combined, they form a pattern of delay, a pattern of hesitation, a pattern of avoidance. And avoidance has a cost. Not immediately. That's why it survives. But over time, the cost becomes massive. Because the market does not reward hesitation. Time does not reward delay. And compounding does not wait for you to feel ready. It moves, with or without you. And if your behavior keeps you on the sidelines, you are not being cautious. You are being excluded from growth, from leverage, from accumulation. And the longer that pattern continues, the harder it becomes to break. Because now it's not just behavior, it's identity. And identity resists change, even when the cost is obvious. That's why people can stay financially stuck for years while believing they are making smart decisions, because the pattern feels logical from the inside, but destructive from the outside. And until you see that difference, you keep repeating it, not because you want to fail, but because your behavior is misaligned. And misalignment is subtle. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It doesn't collapse your finances overnight. It slowly prevents them from growing. And that is far more dangerous, because you don't react to slow problems. You adapt to them. You normalize them. You build your expectations around them. And eventually you stop questioning them. That's how sabotage becomes invisible, not by being extreme, by being consistent. Now here's where the pattern becomes measurable, because up to this point it still feels abstract. Psychology, behavior, identity, but none of that matters unless it translates into money. And it does, relentlessly, because every small inconsistency in your behavior has a financial equivalent. Every delay has a cost. Every hesitation has a price. Every "I'll do it later" is not neutral, it's expensive. You just don't see the bill immediately. Let's make it visible. Imagine two people, same income, same opportunities, same access to information. The difference is not knowledge, the difference is behavior. One starts investing early, not perfectly, not aggressively, just consistently. The other waits, not forever, just a little, a year, maybe 2, maybe 5, because they want to feel ready. Because they want more certainty, because they don't want to make a mistake. From the outside, both decisions look reasonable, but financially they are not even close, because time is not linear, it's exponential, and exponential systems punish delay more than error. Let that sink in. Most people are afraid of making the wrong move, but in financial reality, the biggest loss is not making any move at all, because compounding is not something you activate, it's something you participate in. Or, there is no neutral position. You're either inside the curve or outside of it, and the distance between those two positions widens every year, silently, because compounding doesn't feel dramatic in the beginning. It feels slow, almost irrelevant, which is why people underestimate it, and that's exactly why it works against them, because while you're waiting for results to feel meaningful, time is building something in the background, either for you or against you, and this is where your daily behavior becomes critical, because wealth is not created in moments of intensity. It's created in moments of repetition, small decisions, executed consistently, over long periods. That's it. There is no shortcut around that, but there is a very effective way to break it. Inconsistency. You don't need to stop investing completely. You don't need to make catastrophic mistakes. You just need to interrupt the pattern. Occasionally, enough times, that the system never stabilizes. You invest for a few months, then stop. You save for a while, then compensate with spending. You plan long-term, then react short-term. Each interruption seems harmless, but mathematically, it's destructive, because compounding requires continuity, not intensity. And when continuity breaks, the entire structure weakens. This is the part most people don't calculate. They think in isolated actions. I invested this month. I saved this amount. I avoided this expense. But wealth doesn't respond to isolated actions. It responds to patterns, and patterns are built over time, not in single decisions. So if your behavior is inconsistent, your financial results will be unstable, not because the system failed, but because you never allowed it to work properly. You kept interrupting it. And every interruption resets momentum. Every reset delays growth. Every delay increases the gap, and the gap compounds. Now multiply that by years. 10 years of slight inconsistency, 15 years of delayed decisions, 20 years of almost disciplined behavior. The result is not neutral, it's massive, but not in the way you expect, because what you lose is not visible money. It's invisible growth. It's the version of your financial life that never materialized. And that is much harder to detect because you can't see what didn't happen. You can only feel that something is missing. That despite your effort, despite your intentions, despite your awareness, you're not where you expected to be. And that frustration leads to a dangerous conclusion. I need to do more, work more, earn more, push harder. But that response ignores the real problem, because the issue is not volume, it's alignment. You don't need more intensity, you need consistency. And consistency is not a personality trait, it's a structural behavior. It's what happens when your actions are aligned with your goals, repeatedly, without negotiation. But most people negotiate constantly, with themselves. I'll start next month. I'll adjust later. I deserve this. It's just this once. Each negotiation feels justified, but each one weakens the system, because consistency doesn't collapse dramatically. It erodes gradually, and once erosion starts, it's difficult to notice, because nothing looks broken. Your life still functions, your income still arrives, your expenses still feel manageable, everything appears under control. But underneath that surface, something critical is missing: accumulation. Because accumulation requires alignment, and alignment requires discipline at a level most people underestimate. Not extreme discipline, not painful discipline, just consistent, predictable, non-negotiable behavior. And that's where the conflict intensifies, because your brain resists that structure. Not consciously, automatically. It looks for exceptions. It creates justifications. It introduces flexibility where consistency is required. And that flexibility feels like freedom. But financially, it's friction. It slows down growth. It distorts patterns. It prevents accumulation from stabilizing. And over time, that friction becomes your baseline. You operate in a system where nothing compounds properly, because nothing is sustained long enough. And that is how people sabotage themselves without realizing it, not by making bad decisions, but by making inconsistent ones, repeatedly. Now we reach the part most people avoid, because this is where the pattern stops being abstract and becomes personal. Up to this point, it's easy to agree. Yes, consistency matters. Yes, behavior drives outcomes. Yes, compounding rewards repetition. But agreement doesn't change anything. Recognition does. And recognition only happens when you stop looking at the idea and start looking at yourself. Because the pattern we're talking about is not theoretical, it's observable. In your daily decisions, in how you handle money when no one is watching, in the gap between what you plan and what you actually do. That gap is not random, it follows a structure. And that structure is built around one core mechanism: self-justification. You don't break your financial system impulsively, you justify breaking it. You create reasons, explanations, narratives that make inconsistency feel acceptable. I've been working hard. I'll compensate next month. This isn't a big amount. I need to enjoy life too. Each sentence sounds harmless, each one feels balanced, but together they create a pattern. A Pattern where short-term emotion overrides long-term structure. And once that pattern stabilizes, your financial behavior becomes reactive, not intentional. You don't follow a system. You negotiate with it, constantly. And negotiation is the opposite of structure, because structure removes decision fatigue. Structure removes emotional interference. Structure creates consistency by default. But when you don't have structure, every decision becomes a negotiation. And every negotiation introduces risk. Not the risk of losing money immediately. The risk of breaking the pattern, again and again, until inconsistency becomes your default behavior. At that point, something critical happens. You stop trusting yourself, not consciously, subtly. You start noticing the gap between what you say and what you do, and that gap creates friction, internal friction, because now your identity is split. One part of you wants growth, the other part resists the behavior required to achieve it. And that internal conflict is exhausting. So you resolve it the easiest way possible. You lower the standard, you adjust your expectations, you redefine what progress means, not based on potential, but based on what feels sustainable. And that is where the real damage occurs, not in your bank account, in your perception, because once you adjust your expectations downward, you stop challenging the pattern. You accept it, you normalize it, you build your financial identity around it. This is just how I am, and that sentence is more dangerous than any bad investment, because it locks the pattern in place. Now you're not just behaving inconsistently, you're identifying with it, and identity is resistant to change, even when the outcome is clearly suboptimal. That's why people can stay stuck for decades. Not because they lack knowledge, not because they lack opportunity, but because their behavior has become part of their identity, and their identity protects it, even when it's costing them. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth. The problem is not that you don't know what to do, you do. The problem is that your behavior doesn't follow that knowledge consistently. And until that changes, nothing else matters. Not your income, not the market, not the strategy, because none of those variables can compensate for misalignment. You can earn more and still stay stuck. You can find better opportunities and still miss them. You can learn more about money and still not apply it, because the limiting factor is not information, it's behavior. Aligned behavior, repeated over time, without negotiation, without emotional override, without constant resets. That's what creates wealth, not intensity, not motivation, not occasional discipline, structure, consistency, alignment. And this is where the narrative shifts, because this is no longer about understanding the pattern, it's about confronting it, in real time. The next time you delay a decision, the next time you justify an expense, the next time you say later. That's not a small moment, that's the pattern operating, and every time you allow it, you reinforce it, you make it stronger. You make it more automatic, more invisible, more difficult to break, until eventually it doesn't feel like a choice at all. It feels like your default state. And at that point, your financial outcome is no longer uncertain, it's predictable. Because patterns produce predictable results, always. Now flip the perspective. If inconsistency compounds against you, then consistency compounds for you. Not dramatically at first, not visibly, but structurally. And structure is what matters. Because once a behavior becomes consistent, it no longer requires effort. It becomes automatic. And automatic behavior is powerful. Because it scales. You don't need to be motivated every day. You don't need to feel ready. You don't need perfect conditions. You just execute the pattern. Again, and again, and again. That's how compounding works. Not as a financial concept, as a behavioral system. And the system doesn't care about your intentions, it only cares about what you repeat. So the real question is not, do you want wealth? The real question is, what pattern are you reinforcing daily? Because that pattern is your future, not eventually. Already in motion, already compounding, already shaping the outcome you will experience. And if that pattern is inconsistent, then the result is already decided. Not by the market, not by your income, by you quietly, repeatedly, consistently,